Welcome to Into the Woods, a journey with the tarot. Here, we wander together into the woods to explore ourselves, the world around us, and the mysteries and joys of life through the tarot. I'm your host, Mari, a professional tarot reader and a musician. Grab your deck, and off we go. Hello, and welcome back to Into the Woods. This week, we're going to dive into the Justice card. But before we get started, I wanted to share an exciting idea I had, which is to do some intuitive tarot readings for you. So if you have an issue that's going on in life that you would like an intuitive tarot reading on, you can email your question to info@mariofthewoods.com. and I will answer it here on the podcast. Some brief guidelines for questions. Please keep them open-ended. No yes or no questions. Next, I can't ethically read for someone who hasn't given consent, so your reading needs to be centered around you. It's okay if other people are involved in your situation or your issue, but I can't just do a reading for somebody else. If you submit a question, then you are, of course, consenting to your question being read on the podcast and me giving an intuitive tarot reading for it. You can let me know if you want your name shared or to remain anonymous. So again, you can email info@Mari, M-A-R-I, ofthewoods.com to get an intuitive reading on your question. Okay, now on to the Justice card. This is card 11 of the major arcana in the tarot. And starting on a more surface level, it can be about action and consequence, sort of like a karma idea. Or if we are looking at the sword, perhaps it's about discernment and making fair decisions. But while I was thinking about and reading up about this card more in preparation for this episode, a really big piece came through for me, which is that justice is a feeling. When we look at the Justice card, we see a woman sitting straightforward, upright, stiff, holding balanced scales in one hand and an upright sword in the other. The image is stark, severe, and symmetrical. There's no water present, no sense of softness in the card, which makes it easy for us to think that emotion has no place here. However, when we think about injustice or times where we were treated unfairly, weren't those emotional times? Aren't the feelings behind injustice so strong that they drive us to protest, to fight, to defend, sometimes to act irrationally, to lash out? Justice issues are extremely triggering from an emotional standpoint, and the emotions have to be considered when looking for a solution. They can't be stripped away from the issue. The Justice card asks us to consider those issues of fairness that trigger us and take a deeper look. The sword is there to help us wade through the difficult emotions, the irrationality that injustices might bring out in us, and really take responsibility for ourselves, our action, our own growth, and what we do have power over. As Sally Nichols writes in Tarot and the Archetypal Journey, the sword represents the golden power of discrimination, which enables us to pierce through layers of confusion and false images to reveal a central truth. When we say something is unfair, even if it's totally true, we are giving our power away to some extent. And unfortunately, justice is kind of subjective. All of us experience life and the world differently, making true justice practically impossible, right? Whatever that is. Another part of the problem is that often we can't truly regain what was lost through whatever the discretion was. In our court system, for example, the person who was wronged is typically compensated in a way that feels equal to the loss. But a lot of times the thing that was lost can't actually be regained. I would say, except for if there's an exact amount of money exchange. But even then, it's time, effort, reputation, maybe all these things have been affected. So we're not seeking true balance here, but rather a sense or a feeling of harmony and peace. So another quote from Sally Nichols, she says, essentially, justice is not concerned with mathematical exactness, but with harmony, functional beauty, and a kind of truth which transcends rote measurement. She goes on to talk about the Parthenon columns as an example of this, which I think is so beautiful. So the columns are built so that they're wider at the bottom, narrower at the top, so that as we small humans are walking around the building, they look even. Right? If they were mathematically exactly the same size all the way up, then they would look super top heavy to us. Right? So it's all a matter of perspective and the appearance, not the actual measurement. Similar to that, real balance might not feel or appear balanced. So again, if we're just kind of cutting it down to, really good discernment or finding that true balance, we're lacking that feeling component and the appearance of harmony. So that was a really cool journey for me to bring that into this card, that sense of feeling of emotion. And I have two great reading examples to talk about where, the emotion was kind of the big point of this card coming up. Getting into these two readings, one I did for a woman who was working on starting a business, and the Justice card came up in the middle. It was interesting, it didn't seem relevant to anything that she had said going into the reading, but it turned out that she felt this big sense of resistance working on her business because she was so disenchanted and jaded by capitalism that she didn't want to contribute to it. So there was this huge feeling of unfairness, of justice, of guilt even in wanting to participate in a business and be a part of the system of capitalism. And so we had a really interesting discussion about how we can be conscientious business owners and how we don't have to participate in the flawed elements of capitalism. We don't have to value profit over everything else as business owners. We just don't have to. We don't need to take advantage of people. We can pay people fairly. We can make all these choices, even though the system doesn't enforce those. We can take agency and choose to do that ourselves while sustaining ourselves in this system that we have to be a part of, right? We don't have control to dismantle the system right now, right in this moment. We can dedicate our time to helping with those issues, those bigger issues in ways. But at the end of the day, we have to have a paycheck and we have to get by. We have to support ourselves. So that was a really interesting card that came up and indicated this big block, maybe an issue that was being blamed for the lack of progress in the business. And again, just this sort of putting the power off, giving power away to some other issue instead of really taking responsibility for what, you can do. So that was a very interesting one. Another one, the Justice card came up in a situation where a daughter had been sort of retreating from her parents because they were setting some new boundaries and, didn't like that. And so the Justice card came up. And so the purpose of the card in this reading felt more like the sense of justice, or that justice was central to this issue, needed to be acknowledged. So there was this sense of we're doing what we think is fair, but she really thinks that's unfair. So they weren't really finding that mediation or that peace point where everyone's kind of getting what they want out of it. And sometimes that's okay, right? Sometimes we gotta do some tough love. Sometimes we have to make our kids grow up a little bit. But it just was a really important point that these feelings of justice and fairness were kind of triggering everybody, I think, in the situation, making it hard to have that discernment and make the choices that were needed to go forward. And I will point out in both these readings, and whenever justice appears, it often requires us to take action or make decisions that feel challenging, feel like we don't really want to do them. It's a bit of a tough one. It really is this sense of taking responsibility, maybe recognizing some things that really were on us and we didn't notice. In the business, this wasn't the exact example, but let's say in the business, it was she really was putting it off because of this thing she couldn't control. But at the end of the day, who's the one putting it off, right? It's her or it's you. So there is that like bitter thing you have to swallow with the Justice card, that maybe you really haven't been taking responsibility for yourself, or you haven't been taking action that has actually been doable. Some other things have been holding you back, or you've been putting the blame on other things. And so that does come up a lot with the Justice card, which can be a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. And then moving forward from it, sometimes we do end up having to do things we don't want to do, like, hold boundaries with our kids, even when all we want to do is give them everything they want. So the important thing is to really recognize the emotional component to this and not let it control us, right? Not make it so that we wield the sword to harm, but that we recognize, process, we get our nervous system regulated, and from there we move forward feeling, right, again, more empowered, more aligned, taking responsibility for ourselves and doing what we can, right, what we can to create harmony and peace. I want to talk a little bit about where Justice sits in the series of the major arcana. Justice represents a really big shift in where we're at in this journey of our ego development, our soul development, and our individuation. The card right before Justice is card number 10, the Wheel of Fortune. And the card after it is the Hanged Man. So that's kind of the three cards we're looking at. And the Wheel of Fortune is a card where things are moving really fast, where we may feel like events are just happening to us. It brings in this element of fate and sort of like, the world's spinning and stuff happens. We're on this roller coaster of life and we've just got to go with the ups and the downs. Generally, it is a card of like not having much control. It's like doing what we can to ride the waves smoothly. And then in the Justice card, it's really this shift to like taking responsibility, to like actually being empowered, to growing up. It's like this big growing up point in the major arcana, from, oh my gosh, we have no control and all these archetypal forces are at play, to, okay, I've got the sword in my hand. I've got the scales in my hand. I'm seeing clearly. I'm my own person. I'm going to move forward, taking responsibility for my actions, being aware of my actions, the consequences that they have. And then next, we have the Hanged Man card, which is so interesting because it's sort of like the Wheel of Fortune again, where you don't have much control, right? In the Hanged Man card, we are strung up by our ankle, hanging upside down, unable to go anywhere. But it's a completely different vibe than the Wheel of Fortune because we've chosen it. We've allowed ourselves to be put in this position to gain a new perspective. We've sacrificed ourselves to this situation for knowledge. In the Hanged Man card, the figure looks very much at peace, right? They're not struggling or stressed or anything like that. So there's this sense of being able to find that peace and that surrender to the current situation, like maybe knowing that you're going to gain great insight afterwards. So I just love this 3-card journey of going from, oh my gosh, I have no control, the world events are, just whipping me up and down this roller coaster, to Justice, this like so much stasis, like a feeling of stasis in this card. It's just symmetrical, grounded, everything's pointing straight up and down. It's like this certainty, this surety. I keep using this word, but that discernment and this sense of self. So we gain that in the Justice card. We take responsibility for ourselves, and then we put ourselves back out of control, but this time on purpose. So I think it's a really interesting sequence there. We go into the Hanged Man intentionally surrendering, right? Not getting flung around against our will, but truly surrendering for that greater knowledge, for that moment of stillness. So I love that that's like the choice that's made after the Justice card. Now we're going to talk a little bit about 2 other cards that have to do with balance, but how they're different. So the first card that we're going to compare Justice to is the Temperance card. So this is another major arcana card. We see a beautiful angel holding 2 cups, pouring water from one into the other. This card is often thought of as a card about balance, healing, of, spiritual guidance too. In the Temperance card, we see all the elements, honestly, except the sword, which is really fascinating. We get the water, the cups, we literally get the cups. Then she's also stepping in the water. She has one foot on the ground as well. So we have that grounded earth element too. Then we have the bright red wings and the upward facing triangle on the angel's chest, indicating that fire element. But what we don't have is any of the air stuff happening, right? We don't have swords. There's no clouds in the background. So these two cards both are about balance, but in the Justice card, we have this sort of sharpness, this severity, this tough love element. It's see yourself and grow up. And the Temperance card is much more about self-love, healing, rest, I feel accepting help, knowing when you need help. So there's this much gentler, softer way of finding balance with the Temperance card as opposed to Justice, which, does feel like it has this more tough love quality to it. The Temperance card, I feel doesn't usually come with this oh God, I've got to do something I don't want to do. Whereas the Justice card, I feel that's often the situation. The other card that's about balance and even features the scales is the Six of Pentacles. And this one is really interesting too. We again have a figure dressed in red, mostly standing upright, but they're looking down. But almost everything about the card is asymmetrical, whereas Justice is super perfect. Everything in the card is really rigid and symmetrical. On this card, we have, one person standing. We have two people below. Again, not symmetrically placed, but on either side of the person kneeling and accepting money from them. Right, so the person standing is holding the scales and doling out money, and the money is being poured down, and they're looking down. We also get 3 pentacles on one side and just 2 on the other, and then there's 1 right at the top. So even the spread of the pentacles is asymmetrical as well. And this card is sort of about the imbalance. Often when this one comes up, it's about giving and receiving in a way that can be positive or negative. Honestly, I feel it does come up more often when there's an unhealthy imbalance of power. For example, in a relationship reading, this came up when a person knew that it wasn't a great relationship, but just really wanted a relationship. And so just kind of dealt with a lot of stuff that they probably shouldn't or didn't want to. Then, of course, the other person's well, I can just do whatever, and they're just going to stay with me. So this big imbalance of power. And this card can indicate to us that, maybe we need to be more generous, or maybe we need to receive more, right? That's a really important part of this card too, is, right, are we receiving? Are we accepting help, energy, time, resources from others when we need them? And so those are 2 other cards where balance is important, but is, different vibe, different feeling than Justice, even though we do get some of the same imagery. Okay, so I did come up with a new spread inspired by the Justice card. And this is a spread that you can use if you're in conflict and you are wondering how to repair a situation, or just, something's really triggering and you just want to work through some of the things that are going on. So the spread is going to be 3 cards. The first card is going to be the feelings behind my point of view. Second card is going to be the feelings behind their point of view, the person you're in conflict with. And the third card is what is needed for whatever you're trying to accomplish. This could be peace, reconciliation. It could just be mediation. It just depends. Or it could be what is needed for you to let it go. It could be whatever you need. But I think all those words could be used for the third card, depending on your situation, since, they're all going to be different. I actually did this one yesterday, so I'm not going to pull cards right now, but I encourage you to think of something that feels sort of unsettled in terms of fairness, justice in your life, and maybe give this one a try. I found it really helped me out. Yesterday, I got into a really dumb argument with my husband. In the end, it kind of became about gender, and that really frustrates him because, I'm a hardcore feminist, and sometimes I make everything about gender and injustice to women. This is a big thing for me. Something super trivial became quite heated. And we really both left the conversation feeling like the other person was wrong and we were right. And, both people were way too triggered by nothing. So I pulled some cards on this. And for feelings behind my point of view, I pulled the moon reversed. And this makes so much sense. This kind of like women's rights issues are so incredibly triggering for me. It does feel like a huge shadow piece that often leaves me feeling hopeless, confused, like extremely triggered to where, I'll throw blame around for sure. Yeah, I mean, just brings up a lot of deep, difficult stuff to work with. And then it's like, I can't see or experience anything that doesn't have to do with that or where those kinds of issues don't come into play. So there is that sense of like being lost in illusion. Yeah, so just that moon, dark night of the soul kind of thing happening. So the card I pulled for the feelings behind his point of view was the star. And that one took me a second to kind of, I don't know, like get into the feeling behind it. But what came up for me was that, when I blame things on men, it's like really personally hurtful to him because, he doesn't really take part in a lot of the abusive things that men do. And when I get really angry about this stuff, like it's harmful to his feeling of specialness and who he is and the hope that he has that, he's not that representation of man that's toxic and harmful and that, is very triggering for me. Then the last card that I pulled for what is needed for peace and reconciliation was the Queen of Cups reversed. This one felt really obvious to me. I think like emotions were both flung around in a really hostile way. So, it was just recognizing that the emotions really took control in this situation to a point where the argument just became irrational. And honestly, like we both recognized that and we're laughing about it at the end of the night, like how ridiculous it was. And, just that on both sides, emotions just kind of got out of control. And both of us were really triggered by something in the conversation, which, was really interesting actually, and just led things to going down this sort of wild path. So it was a really helpful spread to work through and just kind of like take ownership for both of our parts in the argument and the disagreement, help us kind of release those and come to a state of peace at the end of the night. Yeah, it was a good experience. So I would recommend giving it a try on your own. That's all we've got for today's episode of Into the Woods. Thank you again for joining me. I hope this illuminated the justice card for you. If you give the spread a try and have a cool experience with it, I would love to hear about it. You can email me at info@Mari, M-A-R-I, ofthewoods.com, or you can message me on Instagram. I'm at Mari of the Woods there as well. Consider submitting a question for me to do an intuitive tarot reading on the next podcast. Would love to hear from some listeners. Until next time, have a magical week.